dear listener, to another gentle journey through the shifting sands of history. Tonight, we invite you to settle back into your comfortable surroundings and allow your mind to drift across the endless expanse of the Sahara Desert, where ancient caravans once carved pathways through golden dunes. Imagine yourself transported to a time when crossing the world's largest hot desert was not a feat of modern engineering, but a testament to human courage, determination, and the irresistible pull of trade and prosperity. The desert holds secrets of civilizations that thrived its harsh embrace, and tonight we shall uncover them together. Provides insulation against both scorching sun and freezing night air, while their broad, cushioned feet distribute their weight across shifting sands that would swallow a horse whole. Watch as the camel handlers, men whose families have worked with these animals for generations, approach each beast with a mixture of respect and casual familiarity. Their hands move with gentle confidence as they check for signs of lameness or injury, examining the soft pads of enormous feet and running weathered fingers along flanks and necks in search of sores or swelling. The camels submit to this inspection with the patience of creatures who understand that their welfare is intimately connected to their handlers' survival, occasionally rumbling soft protests or turning their large, liquid eyes toward their human companions with expressions that seem to hold ancient wisdom. The loading of the caravan is a choreographed dance that has remained unchanged for centuries, each movement refined by generations of desert traders who learned through trial and often fatal error. Heavy bags of salt, each one representing weeks of dangerous labor in distant mines, are secured with ropes that must be neither too tight nor too loose, for the shifting motion of camel travel will work any weakness into a catastrophic failure. Precious bolts of silk from distant China, wrapped in protective leather and oiled cloth, are distributed among multiple animals to ensure that no single loss will destroy a merchant's entire investment. Water containers, fashioned from treated goatskins and sealed with beeswax, are checked and rechecked, for these hold the difference between life and death in the weeks to come. The men work mostly in silence, their concentration absolute, knowing that a poorly secured load or a damaged water skin discovered too late could doom the entire expedition to a death more terrible than any nightmare. As the sun climbs higher and the cool desert air begins to warm, the caravan master calls for departure with a series of sharp whistles that echo across the dunes. This is Ahmed Ibn Battuta, a man whose weathered face tells the story of 30 years spent crossing the Sahara, whose knowledge of water sources, safe passages, and seasonal weather patterns makes him more valuable than all the gold and precious stones in the caravan combined. His dark eyes, surrounded by deep lines carved by sun and squinting against sandstorms, scan the horizon with the intensity of a man who knows that the desert forgives no mistakes and offers no second chances. The elaborate headdress he wears, wrapped in the style of the Tuareg, serves not merely as protection from sun and sand, but as a symbol of his authority and the respect earned through decades of successful crossings. When Ahmed speaks, every man in the caravan listens, for his words carry the weight of survival itself. The morning ritual of departure begins with prayers spoken in multiple languages, as merchants from different cities and tribes seek divine protection for the journey ahead. Some face toward Mecca and recite verses from the Quran, their voices rising and falling in rhythmic cadence that mingles with the desert wind. Others follow older traditions, invoking spirits of the desert and ancestors who walked these same paths in generations past, their whispered words carrying the weight of customs that predate written history. The diversity of faith within the caravan reflects the cosmopolitan nature of Saharan trade, where practical cooperation transcends religious differences, and survival depends on trusting men whose gods may bear different names, but whose hopes and fears remain fundamentally the same. As the prayers conclude and the sun climbs higher in the cloudless sky, the first camels begin their measured pace across the sand, their bells creating a gentle melody that will accompany the caravan for the next 8 to 10 hours of steady travel. The rhythm of caravan travel is unlike anything known to modern life, a measured progression that mirrors the eternal patience of the desert itself. Each camel moves with the unhurried gait that can cover 25 miles in a day, while conserving the energy necessary for weeks of continuous travel. The lead camel, chosen for its calm temperament and sure instincts, sets the pace for the entire column, while the others follow in single file, each animal's nose nearly touching the tail of the one ahead. This formation serves multiple purposes beyond mere organization. It reduces the impact of sandstorms on the majority of animals, conserves energy by allowing following camels to step in established footprints, and creates a system where the loss of the lead animal does not scatter the entire caravan across the trackless desert. The merchants walk alongside their animals when possible, both to reduce wear on the camels and to maintain their own physical condition. But when the sun reaches its zenith and the sand becomes too hot to bear even through thick-soled sandals, they mount their swaying ships of the desert and surrender to the hypnotic motion of travel. The heat of the Saharan sun is unlike anything you have ever experienced in your modern, air-conditioned world. By mid-morning, the temperature climbs steadily toward levels that would be considered dangerous in your comfortable climate. Yet this is merely the beginning of a daily ordeal that will test every fiber of human endurance. The air itself seems to shimmer and dance, creating mirages that mock thirsty travelers with visions of cool lakes and palm-shaded oases that dissolve into empty sand as the caravan approaches. Your clothing, carefully chosen for desert travel, consists of loose-fitting robes that allow air to circulate while protecting your skin from the sun's relentless assault, and a head covering that shields your face and neck while providing shade for your eyes. The fabric is usually white or light-colored to reflect heat, woven from cotton or linen that breathes with your body's movement and wicks away the moisture that your body produces in its desperate attempt to cool itself through perspiration. As the sun reaches its merciless zenith, it's transforming the desert into a furnace that would challenge the endurance of the hardiest souls. The caravan master signals for the midday halt with a series of sharp whistles that cut through the shimmering air. This is not a mere rest stop, but a carefully orchestrated ritual of survival that has been refined through generations of desert crossings. Each element designed to maximize the caravan's chances of seeing another sunset. The camels, their breathing labored but steady, are guided to form a rough circle in whatever minimal shelter can be found, perhaps in the lee of a small rocky outcrop or behind a particularly large dune that offers a few precious degrees of relief from the hammering sun. Their handlers work with practiced efficiency to hobble the animals and check their condition, running experienced hands over legs and flanks to detect any signs of heat exhaustion or dehydration that could prove fatal in the hours ahead. The desert is unforgiving to weakness, and a lame or sick camel represents not just economic loss, but a potential death sentence for its human companions who depend on these remarkable creatures for their very survival in this harsh and alien landscape. The afternoon departure begins with another ritual, inspection of both animals and cargo, for the heat of midday can cause leather straps to stretch and metal fittings to expand, potentially creating dangerous situations when loads shift or water containers develop leaks during travel. The camels, refreshed by their rest and the small amount of water they have been allowed to drink, rise from their kneeling positions with groaning protests that echo across the dunes, their movements deliberate and economical as they prepare once again to carry their human partners deeper into the heart of the Sahara. The merchants check their personal equipment one final time, ensuring that water containers are securely fastened, that protective clothing is properly arranged, and that the small emergency supplies that might mean survival if separated from the main caravan are readily accessible. These preparations, repeated countless times throughout the crossing, become automatic responses that free the conscious mind to focus on the more immediate challenges of navigation, other observation, and the constant vigilance required to detect potential threats before they become life-threatening emergencies. The rhythm of afternoon travel differs subtly from the morning's pace, adjusted to account for the accumulated fatigue of both humans and animals and the continuing challenge of heat that, while beginning to moderate, still poses a serious threat to anyone foolish enough to underestimate its power. The caravan moves in its established formation, but with increased attention to the condition of individual animals and men, ready to adjust pace or call additional halts if anyone shows signs of serious distress. The sand beneath their feet radiates heat like a giant griddle, forcing the travelers to keep moving to prevent their footwear from becoming unbearably hot, while the air itself seems thick and oppressive, demanding conscious effort to fill lungs that feel constantly parched despite careful rationing of their precious water supplies. This is the true test of desert travel. The long afternoon hours when the heat has had time to penetrate every fiber of clothing and equipment, when the body's natural cooling systems work at maximum capacity just to maintain basic function, and when the psychological pressure of the vast, empty landscape can begin to wear down even the most experienced travelers. Yet there is a strange beauty in this harshness, a austere magnificence that speaks to something deep in the human spirit that responds to challenges that test the very limits of endurance and will. The endless dunes shift and change color as the sun moves across the cloudless sky, creating a constantly evolving landscape of light and shadow that can entrance the eye and soothe the mind, even as it threatens to destroy the body. Occasionally, a flight of birds passes overhead, their cries a reminder that life persists even in this seemingly barren wasteland, following ancient migration routes that connect distant oases and provide hope that water and rest lie somewhere ahead in a trackless immensity. The desert teaches patience and humility to those who would cross its domain, lessons that go far beyond mere survival skills to touch the very essence of what it means to be human in the face of natural forces that dwarf individual concerns and ambitions. As the afternoon progresses and the heat gradually begins to lose some of its devastating intensity, conversations resume among the travelers. Quiet discussions of trade routes and market conditions, family news from distant cities, and the countless small observations that help maintain morale during the long, arduous journey. These social connections become lifelines that bind the caravan together as a functioning unit, creating bonds of mutual dependence and shared purpose that transcend the individual differences of religion, tribe, and nationality that might divide these men in other circumstances. Stories are shared of previous crossings, narrow escapes from bandits or sandstorms, miraculous discoveries of water in desperate situations, and the great merchants of the past whose legendary journeys inspired the current generation of desert traders. The human voice becomes a comfort in the vast silence of the desert, a reminder of civilization and community in a landscape that seems designed to reduce human beings to their most basic survival instincts. The afternoon sun, though still punishingly hot, begins to cast longer shadows that provide increasingly precious relief for both animals and men, creating small islands of shade that move slowly across the sand like benedictions from some desert deity. The camels, sensing the approaching end of another day's ordeal, maintain their steady pace with what might almost be called anticipation. Their internal clocks attuned to the rhythms of desert travel that will soon bring another evening's rest and the blessed coolness that follows sunset in this land of extremes. The merchants, their faces masked by cloth wrappings that protect them from both sun and the fine sand that penetrates everything despite their best efforts, walk with the measured stride of men who have learned to conserve energy while maintaining forward progress, their eyes constantly scanning the horizon for landmarks, threats, or the miraculous sight of green vegetation that signals the presence of water and the possibility of a more comfortable night's rest than the open desert can provide. As the sun begins its slow descent toward the western horizon, painting the endless dunes in shades of gold and crimson that would inspire poets, if any, lived to witness such beauty in this desolate realm. The caravan masters experienced eye searches for a suitable camping ground among the shifting landscape of sand and stone. This decision carries weight far beyond mere comfort, for the choice of campsite can determine whether the travelers wake to face another day of challenges, or whether they fall victim to the countless dangers that emerge when darkness clangs the Sahara and transforms it from a furnace into a realm of cold winds, prowling predators, and human threats that move like shadows across the starlit dunes. The ideal location offers some protection from the wind that will rise with the cooling air, access to any available fuel for the small fires that provide both warmth and psychological comfort during the long desert nights, in defensive positions that allow sentries to observe approaching threats, while the majority of the expedition rests in whatever security can be achieved in this vast and hostile wilderness. Every experienced desert traveler knows that the apparent emptiness of the Sahara is deceptive, for this seeming wasteland supports a surprising variety of life, much of it perfectly adapted to take advantage of the careless or unwary who fail to respect the desert's hidden dangers. The process of making camp begins with the careful arrangement of the camels in a defensive circle, their massive bodies forming a living wall that provides both protection from wind and a barrier against potential attackers who might emerge from the darkness with violence in their hearts. The animals, exhausted from the day's travel, but well trained in the routines of desert life, submit patiently to the hobbling process that will prevent them from wandering away during the night, while still allowing them limited movement to find whatever sparse vegetation might exist in the vicinity of the camp. Their handlers perform a final, thorough inspection of each animal, checking for injuries or signs of illness that might have developed during the day's travel, applying salves and poultices to minor wounds, and ensuring that the precious beasts receive their carefully rationed portion of water and whatever fodder has been carried for their sustenance. The relationship between camel and handler transcends mere utility, evolving into a partnership based on mutual dependence and respect that recognizes the animal as more than just a beast of burden, but as a crucial ally in the struggle for survival that defines every moment of desert existence. The unloading of cargo requires the same methodical care that characterized the morning's preparations, but with added urgency as the rapidly cooling air signals the approach of night and the need to establish defensive positions before darkness makes such preparations impossible. Precious goods are arranged in the center of the camp where they can be most easily guarded, while essential supplies like water containers, cooking equipment, and weapons are distributed strategically to ensure quick access in case of emergency. The merchants work with quiet efficiency born of long practice, their movements economical and purposeful as they transform the random accumulation of travel gear into an organized base camp that maximizes both comfort and security for the long night ahead. Each man knows his responsibilities without need for detailed instructions, understanding that survival depends on the smooth execution of duties that have been refined through generations of desert crossings and countless nights spent in the uncertain safety of temporary camps established in the heart of one of the world's most challenging environments. As the sun disappears beyond the western dunes and the first stars begin to appear in the rapidly darkening sky, the temperature begins its dramatic plunge that characterizes desert nights and catches unprepared travelers off guard with its sudden intensity. The same clear skies that allowed the sun to bake the landscape without mercy during the day now permit the rapid escape of heat into the infinite blackness of space, transforming the burning sands into a cold and hostile environment that can bring death by freezing to those who fail to prepare adequately for this nightly transformation. The merchants wrap themselves in heavy woolen robes and gather around small fires built from dried camel dung and whatever scraps of wood they have been fortunate enough to find during the day's travel. The flickering flames providing not just warmth, but also the comforting illusion of civilization and human control. In the face of the vast indifference of the desert night, the conversations that arise around these fires are different from the brief exchanges of the day, deeper and more personal as men contemplate their mortality and share the fears and hopes that sustain them through the long weeks of desert crossing. The evening meal, though simple by the standards of settled communities, represents a moment of relative abundance and comfort, that breaks the monotony of survival-focused activity that dominates desert travel. Dried dates and figs provide sweetness and quick energy, while small portions of preserved meat offered protein necessary for maintaining strength during the arduous journey. Some expeditions carry flour and oil that can be mixed with precious water to create flatbread baked on hot stones arranged around the fire, filling the camp with aromas that evoke memories of home and family, far removed from the harsh realities of desert existence. The act of sharing food becomes a ritual that reinforces the bonds of mutual dependence that hold the caravan together, creating temporary moments of human warmth and companionship that provide psychological sustenance as important as the physical nourishment derived from the simple fare. Men speak softly of families left behind, of children who may have grown during their absence, and of the markets and cities that await at the end of their long journey, weaving connections between past and future that help sustain them through the immediate challenges of survival in this unforgiving landscape. During the darkest hours before dawn, when human energy reaches its lowest point and the cold penetrates most deeply into bones and muscles, stiffened by the day's exertions, strange phenomena sometimes occur that test the psychological stability of even the most experienced desert travelers. Sounds carry impossibly far in the still air, creating the illusion that voices or footsteps originate much closer to the camp than their actual source, while the complete darkness beyond the fire's reach can play tricks on tired eyes that begin to see movement and shapes where none exist. Some men report hearing the voices of family members calling from the darkness, or seeing figures beckoning from just beyond the reach of firelight, phenomena that experienced caravan leaders dismiss as products of fatigue and psychological stress, but which, nonetheless, contribute to the atmosphere of tension and uncertainty that pervades desert nights. The human mind, stressed by constant vigilance and deprived of the normal sensory input of civilized life, begins to create its own entertainment and terrors, adding psychological challenges to the already formidable physical demands of desert survival. The approach of dawn, signaled first by the faintest lightning of the eastern horizon and then by the gradual appearance of familiar landmarks emerging from the darkness, brings relief that goes far beyond the simple pleasure of surviving another night in this hostile environment. The slow return of light allows the travelers to assess their situation, check their equipment, and prepare for another day's journey with the confidence that comes from having successfully navigated the dangers of darkness one more time. The morning rituals begin again with prayers of gratitude for safe passage through the night and requests for protection during the day ahead, while the practical business of breaking camp and preparing for travel resumes with the methodical efficiency that characterizes all aspects of desert survival. The fires are carefully extinguished and their ashes scattered to leave no trace that might attract unwanted attention from those who might follow, while the camels are inspected and loaded according to the same careful procedures that ensure the caravan's continued progress across the vast and unforgiving landscape. As the eastern sky begins to lighten with the promise of another day's challenges and opportunities, the merchants gather their personal belongings and prepare to resume the ancient dance of commerce and survival that has brought them into this remote and dangerous corner of the world. The night's vigil has been successfully completed, adding another day to their survival count and bringing them one step closer to the distant markets where their precious cargo will be exchanged for goods and gold that will justify the enormous risks they have undertaken in crossing the world's largest and most dangerous desert. Yet they know that many more nights of vigilance and many more days of grueling travel lie ahead before they can count their expedition as successful, and they face the rising sun with a mixture of hope and resignation that characterizes all who choose to make their living in the harsh embrace of the Sahara's eternal challenge to human endurance and determination. Among the countless souls who dared to challenge the Sahara's merciless domain, few left records as detailed and illuminating as those of Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Battuta, the great traveler from Tangier, whose journeys across the medieval Islamic world provided us with invaluable glimpses into the commercial networks that bound together distant civilizations through threads of trade and shared faith. In the year 1352, when Europe was still struggling to emerge from the devastation of the Black Death, and when its great age of exploration had not yet begun, Ibn Battuta embarked upon what would prove to be one of his most challenging expeditions, crossing the Sahara to reach the legendary kingdoms of the western Sudan, where gold flowed like quata and salt was worth its weight in precious metals. His account of this journey, preserved in the Rilla, provides us with an intimate portrait of not just the physical hardships of desert travel, but of the extraordinary individuals who built vast fortunes by mastering the art of trans-Saharan commerce, and who created trading networks that spanned continents and connected civilizations separated by thousands of miles of the world's most inhospitable terrain. Tonight, we follow Ibn Battuta into the heart of the Sahara, where he encountered one of the most remarkable figures of medieval African commerce, a man whose story illuminates the vast scale and sophisticated organization of the trade routes that made the crossing of this terrible desert not just possible, but profitable beyond the dreams of European merchants. The journey that would bring Ibn Battuta face to face with the realities of Saharan commerce began in the bustling markets of Fez, where the great traveler spent months preparing for an expedition that even his extensive experience of dangerous journeys could not fully prepare him for. The Morocco of the 14th century was a crossroads of three worlds, where European merchants seeking African gold met Arab traders carrying the luxury goods of the East, and where Berber nomads from the desert brought salt, slaves, and ivory to exchange for manufactured goods, weapons, and the grain that sustained life in the harsh regions beyond the Atlas Mountains. Ibn Battuta, already famous throughout the Islamic world for his previous travels to Mecca, India, and the distant lands of Southeast Asia, was no stranger to hardship and danger. Yet, he approached the prospect of crossing the Sahara with a respect bordering on trepidation that reflected the desert's fearsome reputation among even the most experienced travelers. The preparations for such a journey required not just personal equipment and supplies, but the careful cultivation of relationships with the established trading networks that controlled access to the trans-Saharan routes, and whose cooperation could mean the difference between successful passage and death in the trackless wastes of sand and stone. The caravan that Ibn Battuta joined for his southward journey was organized by merchants from the Maghreb who had spent their entire lives perfecting the complex logistics required for successful desert crossings. Men whose knowledge of water sources, seasonal weather patterns, and the political situation in distant oasis towns represented accumulated wisdom worth more than any cargo they carried. These were not casual adventurers seeking quick profit, but members of established trading families whose relationships with desert nomads, oasis communities, and the great commercial centers of the Sudan had been built up over generations of successful expeditions, and whose reputation for reliability and fair dealing opened doors that remained closed to less established competitors. The scale of their operations would have impressed even the most successful European merchants of the time, involving not just the immediate caravan, but networks of agents, suppliers, and financiers stretching from the Mediterranean coast to the forest regions south of the Sahara, creating a commercial system that moved goods, information, and capital across distances that European traders would not successfully navigate for another 2 centuries. The first weeks of the journey south from Fez took the caravan through the familiar territories of settled Morocco, following established routes through mountain passes and across fertile plains, where villages and small cities provided opportunities for rest, resupply, and the gradual accumulation of additional goods and personnel for the long desert crossing ahead. Ibn Battuta's journal records his fascination with the gradual transformation of the landscape as the expedition moved away from the Mediterranean world of his birth and into regions where Arab and Berber cultures blended with influences from sub-Saharan Africa, creating unique local traditions that reflected the cosmopolitan nature of the trans-Saharan trade networks. The markets they passed through offered goods from across the known world: Chinese silk and porcelain, Indian spices and precious stones, European weapons and textiles, alongside local products like leather goods, metalwork, and the high-quality horses bred in the Atlas mountain valleys that were prized throughout North Africa in the Middle East for their speed and endurance in desert conditions. As the caravan approached the edge of the Sahara proper, the character of their expedition began to change in ways that reflected the unique challenges of desert commerce and the specialized knowledge required for survival in one of Earth's most hostile environments. The camels that would carry them across the sand ocean were not the ordinary beasts of burden used for local transport, but specially selected animals bred for desert work, their bloodlines carefully maintained by nomadic tribes. Co's expertise in camel husbandry represented centuries of accumulated knowledge about the creatures that made trans-Saharan trade possible. The handlers who would guide these animals across trackless wastes were members of Berber tribes whose intimate knowledge of desert conditions, navigation techniques, and survival skills made them indispensable partners in the commercial ventures that brought together merchants from distant regions in pursuit of the extraordinary profits available to those brave enough to challenge the Sahara's deadly embrace. These men moved between the settled world of cities and agriculture and the nomadic realm of the deep desert with an ease that pressed even experienced travelers like Ibn Battuta, equally comfortable negotiating with sophisticated urban merchants and reading the subtle signs of weather and terrain that could spell life or death for desert expeditions. The guide who led Ibn Battuta's small party from the main caravan to Taghaza was a man of the Masufa tribe, desert nomads whose specialized knowledge of the most remote and challenging regions of the Sahara made them indispensable partners for anyone seeking to reach the isolated mining settlements that existed in areas too harsh and remote for other desert peoples to inhabit permanently. This guide, whose name Ibn Battuta recorded as Abu Bakr ibn Umar, possessed an almost supernatural ability to navigate across trackless wastes using subtle signs visible to outsiders: the angle of wind-carved rocks, the color and texture of different sand formations, the behavior of the few hardy creatures that managed to survive in these remote regions, and most importantly, his ability to locate the scattered wells and seasonal water sources that provided the only reliable means of survival during the long journey to and from the salt mines. His knowledge represented not just individual expertise, but the accumulated wisdom of his people, passed down through generations of desert dwellers, who had learned through trial and often fatal error how to survive and prosper in conditions that would have defeated less experienced travelers. Within days of leaving the safety of the major Oasis settlements, as the small expedition approached Taghaza after days of travel across increasingly desolate terrain, Ibn Battuta began to understand why this remote outpost had acquired such a fearsome reputation among even experienced desert travelers, and why the men who chose to work in the salt mines commanded both high wages and deep respect. throughout the commercial networks of North and West Africa. The landscape around the mining settlement bore no resemblance to any inhabited place Ibn Battuta had encountered in his extensive travels, offering neither natural beauty nor the comforts of civilization, but rather presenting a vista of harsh functionality where every structure, every activity, and every aspect of daily life was subordinated to the single purpose of extracting, processing, and preparing for transport the salt deposits that lay beneath the sun-baked earth of this remote corner of the Sahara. The very air seemed thick with salt dust that coated everything and everyone, creating an environment that challenged both physical endurance and psychological resilience as men worked in conditions that tested the limits of human adaptability and determination. When Ibn Battuta first laid eyes upon Abd al-Rahman ibn Suleiman in the salt-encrusted courtyard of Taghaza's only substantial building, he witnessed the embodiment of a man who had transformed the harsh realities of desert existence into unprecedented commercial success through a combination of iron will, shrewd intelligence, and an almost supernatural ability to thrive in conditions that would have broken lesser individuals within weeks of arrival in this remote outpost of human endurance. The Salt King, as he was known throughout the commercial networks that stretched from Morocco to Mali, stood barely above average height, his frame lean and weathered by decades of exposure to the alkaline dust and brutal climate of the salt mines. Yet he carried himself with the unmistakable authority of a man accustomed to command and respected by everyone from the humblest mine workers to the most sophisticated merchants from distant cities who depended on his operations for their own prosperity. His dark eyes, surrounded by deep lines etched by years of squinting against the glare of salt-white ground reflecting the merciless Saharan sun, held a penetrating intelligence that immediately conveyed his mastery of the complex logistics, financial calculations, and human relationships that made large-scale salt production possible in this most unlikely of locations. The story of Abd Armam's rise to dominance in the Taghaza salt trade, as related to Ibn Battuta during the long evening conversations that provided welcome relief from the day's brutal heat, began 30 years earlier when he arrived at the mining settlement as a young man fleeing political troubles in his native Oasis, Tlemcen, carrying nothing but the clothes on his back and a determination to survive that would prove stronger than the desert forces arrayed against him. In those early days, Taghaza was controlled by a consortium of merchants from Walata and Timbuktu, who treated the mining operation as a subsidiary concern to their more profitable gold and slave trading ventures, allowing the salt production to function with minimal oversight and investment as long as it continued to generate acceptable profits without requiring significant attention from the urban-based commercial elite. This neglect created opportunities for ambitious individuals willing to endure the hardships of permanent residence in the mining settlement. And Abd al-Rahman quickly recognized that knowledge, gained through direct experience of salt production, could be transformed into commercial advantage over competitors who preferred to manage their interests from the comfort of distant oasis cities where life offered greater physical comfort, but fewer opportunities for those willing to sacrifice immediate pleasure for long-term gain. The young Abd al-Rahman's first years in Taghaza were marked by a systematic campaign to master every aspect of salt production, from the back-breaking labor of excavating deposits buried beneath layers of sand and stone to the delicate chemistry involved in purifying crude salt into the high-quality product that commanded premium prices in distant markets where consumers could afford to pay extra for superior goods. He worked alongside the permanent residents of the mining settlement, mostly men from desert tribes who had chosen the relative security of steady employment over the uncertainties of nomadic life, learning not just the technical skills required for efficient salt extraction, but also the complex social dynamics that governed life in this isolated community where cooperation meant survival and conflict could prove fatal to all involved parties. His willingness to perform the most difficult and dangerous tasks without complaint, combined with his obvious intelligence and growing expertise in production techniques, gradually earned him the respect of his fellow workers and the attention of the settlement's informal leadership. Men whose influence derived not from official appointments, but from their proven ability to solve problems and mediate disputes in an environment where traditional sources of authority held little relevance. The breakthrough that established Abd al-Rahman's reputation as more than just another ambitious young man seeking to improve his circumstances came during his third year at Taghaza, when a combination of unusually severe sandstorms and a series of equipment failures threatened to shut down salt production at a time when caravans from the south were arriving with expectations of purchasing large quantities of high-quality product for transport to markets, where seasonal demand had driven prices to extraordinarily profitable levels, while the established managers debated courses of action and sought to assign blame for the crisis. Abd al-Rahman organized a small group of the most skilled workers to implement an innovative solution that combined traditional mining techniques with modifications he had developed through careful observation of the unique geological conditions at Taghaza, successfully restoring production within days rather than the weeks or months that more conventional approaches would have required. The financial value of this intervention, measured in terms of contracts fulfilled and relationships preserved with important trading partners, established his reputation as a problem solver whose practical knowledge could translate directly into commercial success, opening doors to greater responsibility and increased influence within the mining settlement's informal but effective power structure. The salt extraction process that Abd al-Rahman perfected during his rise to prominence represented a fascinating blend of ancient techniques passed down through generations of desert peoples and innovative adaptations developed specifically for the unique conditions found in the Taghaza deposits, creating a production system that maximized both efficiency and quality while minimizing the enormous physical demands placed on workers laboring in one of the world's most challenging industrial environments. The salt beds themselves lay buried beneath layers of sand and rocky debris that had to be carefully removed without disturbing the crystalline formations that represented years or even decades of natural accumulation, requiring workers to combine the physical strength needed for heavy excavation with the delicate touch necessary to preserve the integrity of valuable deposits that could be destroyed by careless handling or inappropriate tools. The excavated salt then underwent a complex purification process that removed sand, organic matter, and mineral impurities that would reduce its value in markets where consumers had grown accustomed to products of thuds. Consistently, high quality, involving repeated washing with precious water, careful drying under controlled conditions, and final sorting into different grades based on color, crystal size, and purity levels that determine ultimate selling prices and appropriate market destinations. The logistics of salt production at Taghaza required organizational skills that would have impressed administrators in major cities, as Abd al-Rahman coordinated the activities of hundreds of workers, managed relationships with dozens of suppliers and contractors, and maintained careful records of production, costs, and profits that provided the financial information necessary for making strategic decisions about expansion, equipment purchases, and market strategies that would determine the long-term success of his increasingly dominant commercial empire. The workforce he assembled combined permanent residents who provided continuity and accumulated expertise with seasonal laborers who arrived from distant regions during peak production periods, requiring careful management of housing, food distribution, water allocation, and work assignments that balanced individual capabilities with collective needs while maintaining the discipline and cooperation essential for safety and efficiency in such a dangerous working environment. the supply challenges involved in supporting large-scale salt production in one of the most remote locations on Earth demanded creative solutions for obtaining everything from mining tools and construction materials to food, supplies, and medical care for workers whose health and safety directly affected productivity and profitability of the entire operation. Ibn Battuta's detailed observations of daily life in the salt mines provide invaluable insight into the human cost of the commercial success that made trans-Saharan trade possible, describing working conditions that tested the limits of human endurance while generating profits that supported entire regional economies and connected distant civilizations through networks of exchange that transcended political boundaries and cultural differences. The miners themselves worked in shifts that began before dawn to take advantage of the cooler temperatures that provided some relief from the crushing heat that would make labor impossible once the sun reached its full intensity, descending into excavated pits where the temperature could be significantly higher than the already brutal surface conditions and where the air was thick with salt dust that coated lungs and irritated eyes, nose, and throat with every breath. Their tools were simple but effective, wooden shovels and picks designed to avoid damaging delicate salt crystals, woven baskets for carrying extracted material to processing areas, and various implements for breaking large formations into manageable pieces that could be transported efficiently while maintaining the structural integrity that determines final product quality and market value. That the social hierarchy that governed life in Taghaza reflected the unique conditions and requirements of salt production, creating a system that combined elements of traditional desert tribal organization with adaptations necessitated by the demands of large-scale commercial operations and the need to maintain order and efficiency among workers from diverse backgrounds who might have little in common beyond their willingness to endure extraordinary hardships in pursuit of economic opportunity. At the apex of this hierarchy stood Abd al-Rahman himself, whose authority derived not from traditional sources of power like noble birth or religious learning, but from his proven ability to make the salt mines profitable while maintaining the complex relationships with trading partners, government officials, and tribal leaders that ensured the continued viability of Taghaza as a commercial center. Below him were the production supervisors, experienced miners who had demonstrated both technical competence and leadership abilities necessary for coordinating the work of large groups while maintaining safety standards and quality control in an environment where mistakes could prove fatal and poor workmanship could result in significant financial losses for the entire operation. The middle ranks of Taghaza society included skilled craftsmen whose specialized knowledge was essential for maintaining equipment, constructing and repairing buildings and infrastructure, and performing the technical tasks required for salt purification and processing. Men whose expertise commanded respect and relatively comfortable living conditions despite the harsh environment in which they practiced their trades. These included carpenters who constructed the wooden frameworks used for supporting excavations and building structures capable of withstanding constant assault of wind-driven sand and salt. Metal workers who maintained and repaired the tools and equipment upon which all production depended, and specialists in various aspects of salt chemistry and processing who possessed knowledge gained through years of experience that could not be easily replaced if they chose to seek opportunities elsewhere. Their position in the settlement's hierarchy reflected not just their individual skills, but also their value to the overall success of the mining operation and their role in training new workers who arrived with enthusiasm but little practical knowledge of the unique challenges involved in desert salt production. The women of Taghaza, though fewer in number than the male workers who comprised the majority of the settlement's population, played crucial roles in maintaining the domestic and social infrastructure that made long-term residence in such a harsh environment possible, while contributing their own specialized knowledge and skills to the overall success of the mining operation. Many were wives or relatives of permanent residents who had chosen to accompany their men to this remote outpost rather than remain in their home communities, while others were local women from nomad groups who had married into the settlements community and brought with them valuable knowledge of desert survival techniques, traditional medicine, and handicraft skills that improved the quality of life for all residents. Their domestic activities included food preparation and preservation, textile production and repair, childcare and education, and various forms of traditional medicine and healing practices that provided essential health care in a location where professional medical treatment was unavailable and where minor injuries or illnesses could quickly become serious threats to individual survival and community stability. The economic arrangements that governed life in Taghaza combined elements of wage labor, profit sharing, and cooperative enterprise in ways that reflected both the unique challenges of desert salt production and Abd al-Rahman's sophisticated understanding of human motivation and the incentive systems necessary to maintain productivity and loyalty among workers whose alternatives to continued employment included either dangerous journeys across the desert to seek opportunities elsewhere or acceptance of poverty and unemployment in their home regions where economic conditions offered limited prospects for improvement. The basic wage system provided regular payments in both cash and goods that ensured workers could meet their immediate needs for food, clothing, and other essentials while accumulating savings that might eventually provide capital for establishing independent enterprises or supporting family members in distant communities. But this was supplemented by bonuses and profit-sharing arrangements that gave workers direct stakes in the success of production operations and incentives to maintain high standards of workmanship and efficiency even during periods when supervision was limited and individual initiative was required to solve problems and maintain productivity. The true measure of Abd al-Rahman Ibn Suleiman's genius as a commercial strategist became apparent to Ibn Battuta not through observation of the impressive salt production facilities at Taghaza, remarkable though they were, but through gradual understanding of the vast network of relationships, contracts, and financial arrangements that connected this remote desert outpost to markets and trading centers spanning thousands of miles across North and West Africa, creating a commercial empire that generated wealth and influence far beyond what the physical assets of the mining operation might suggest to casual observers. Unfamiliar with the complexities of trans-Saharan trade, during the long evening conversations that provided welcome relief from the brutal daytime heat and the constant presence of salt dust that permeated every aspect of life in the mining settlement, Abd al-Rahman revealed to the great traveler the intricate web of partnerships, credit arrangements, and mutual obligations that enabled him to coordinate salt production with market demand across distances that would have challenged the communication capabilities of much larger and more sophisticated commercial enterprises operating in regions blessed with better transportation, infrastructure, and more predictable environmental conditions. The Salt King's commercial network extended northward through the great trading centers of Morocco and Algeria, where his agents and partners managed warehouses, negotiated contracts with local merchants, and monitored market conditions that influenced pricing strategies and production decisions, made hundreds of miles away in the harsh isolation of Taghaza, creating a system of information flow and decision-making coordination that would have impressed administrators of major European commercial enterprises, despite operating without benefit of the written contracts, legal institutions, and financial instruments that facilitated long-distance trade in more developed economic systems. These northern connections included partnerships with established merchant families in Fez, Mex, and Tlemcen, whose own commercial networks reached into European markets where North African salt competed with products from Mediterranean sources, requiring ABD Al-Rahman to maintain detailed knowledge of international market conditions, currency fluctuations, and political developments that might affect trade routes and commercial relationships extending far beyond the African continent where his primary operations were located. Equally impressive were ABD Al-Rahman's commercial relationships extending southward into the heart of West Africa, where his salt found eager markets in the great trading cities of Walata, Timbuktu, and Gao, as well as in the gold-producing regions where salt was literally worth its weight in precious metal and where control of reliable supply sources could determine the success or failure of merchants engaged in the lucrative but highly competitive trade in gold, ivory, and slaves that formed the foundation of West African commercial prosperity. The agents who represented ABD Al-Rahman's interests in these southern markets were not merely buyers and sellers, but sophisticated commercial operators who maintained their own warehouses, credit relationships, and local partnerships, while serving as sources of market intelligence and strategic planning information that enabled a salt king to anticipate changes in demand, adjust production levels, and coordinate pricing strategies across multiple markets separated by vast distances in weeks or months of dangerous desert travel that made rapid communication and adjustment impossible. The financial instruments and credit arrangements that enabled ABD Al-Rahman to coordinate commercial operations across such vast distances represented a remarkable achievement in medieval commercial organization, creating systems of trust, mutual obligation, and risk-sharing that facilitated transactions involving enormous sums of money and valuable goods, despite the absence of formal banking institutions, standardized currencies, or legal frameworks that European merchants would have considered essential for conducting business on similar scales. The foundation of these arrangements was a network of personal relationships built up over decades of successful transactions, fair dealing, and mutual support during difficult periods when market conditions, political instability, or natural disasters threatened the prosperity of individual merchants and entire trading communities. These relationships transcended ethnic, religious, and regional boundaries, creating a cosmopolitan commercial culture that valued competence, reliability, and integrity over traditional social distinctions, and that enabled men from diverse backgrounds to work together in pursuit of mutual prosperity, despite the cultural and linguistic differences that might have created barriers to cooperation in other circumstances. The complexity of ABD Al-Rahman's financial operations became apparent to Ibn Battuta through discussions of specific transactions and contractual arrangements that illustrated the sophisticated level of commercial organization required to coordinate salt production with market demand while managing the enormous risks associated with desert transportation, political instability, and market fluctuations that could transform profitable ventures into devastating losses within short periods of time. A typical large-scale salt shipment might involve advance payments from buyers in distant markets, insurance arrangements with other merchants who accepted shares of transportation risks in exchange for portions of anticipated profits, credit agreements with camel owners and caravan organizers who provided transportation services, and complex pricing formulas that adjusted final payment amounts based on market conditions existing at the time of delivery, rather than at the time when original contracts were negotiated. These arrangements required detailed record keeping, careful monitoring of market conditions across multiple regions, and constant communication with partners and agents whose own success depended on the accurate and timely flow of information about everything from weather conditions and caravan schedules to political developments and currency fluctuations. that might affect the profitability of specific transactions. Ibn Battuta's observations of Abd al-Rahman's daily business activities revealed a man whose intellectual capabilities and organizational skills would have impressed the most sophisticated merchants of Cairo, Damascus, or Baghdad, yet who had chosen to base his operations in one of the most remote and challenging locations imaginable, rather than seeking the comfort and convenience of established commercial centers where conducting business would have been far easier and more pleasant. The Salt King's typical day began before dawn with prayers and a simple meal, followed by hours of correspondence with agents and partners throughout North and West Africa, dictating letters and reviewing reports that kept him informed of market conditions, political developments, and commercial opportunities that might affect his far-flung operations. His ability to maintain detailed mental records of complex financial arrangements, market trends, and individual relationships, while simultaneously managing the day-to-day challenges of salt production in harsh desert conditions, demonstrated an extraordinary combination of intellectual capacity and practical competence that explained his success in building one of the most extensive and profitable commercial enterprises in medieval Africa. The strategic thinking that guided Abd al-Rahman's commercial decisions reflected a sophisticated understanding of market dynamics, competitive relationships, and long-term trends that enabled him to anticipate changes in supply and demand conditions while positioning his enterprise to take advantage of opportunities that less perceptive competitors might miss or dismiss as too risky or complex to pursue successfully. His decision to invest heavily in improving production techniques and expanding capacity during periods when other salt producers were reducing operations in response to short-term market difficulties demonstrated the kind of contrarian thinking and long-term perspective that distinguished truly successful entrepreneurs from merchants who focused primarily on immediate profits without adequate attention to strategic positioning for future growth. Similarly, his willingness to extend credit to reliable partners during difficult periods and to share risks and profits with key suppliers and distributors create a loyalty and mutual dependence that provided competitive advantages not easily replicated by rivals who approached commercial relationships as zero-sum competitions rather than opportunities for mutual benefit. The legacy of Abd al-Rahman ibn Suleiman's commercial achievements extended far beyond his personal wealth and success to encompass broader contributions to the development of trans-Saharan trade networks, the improvement of production techniques and commercial practices, and the creation of institutional innovations that facilitated long-distance commerce throughout medieval Africa and influenced the evolution of commercial relationships between North Africa and the Mediterranean world. His training of younger merchants and his willingness to share knowledge and experience with potential competitors created a cadre of skilled commercial operators who carried his methods and innovations to other regions and industries, while his example inspired other entrepreneurs to attempt similarly ambitious ventures in challenging environments previously considered unsuitable for large-scale commercial development. The Salt King's success demonstrated that exceptional individual achievement could overcome even the most formidable environmental and logistical obstacles when combined with strategic thinking, operational excellence, and the ability to build and maintain the complex human relationships essential for success in medieval commercial environments. Ibn Battuta's final assessment of Abd al-Rahman ibn Suleiman, recorded in his journal after departing Taghaza to continue his journey toward the great trading cities of West Africa, captured both his admiration for the Salt King's remarkable achievements and his recognition that such success came at enormous personal cost in terms of physical hardship, social isolation, and the constant stress of managing complex operations in one of the world's most challenging environments. The great traveler noted that Abd al-Rahman seemed older than his actual years, his body weathered by decades of exposure to harsh desert conditions, and his manner marked by the cautious precision of a man who had learned that small mistakes in such an environment could have devastating consequences for himself and the hundreds of people who depended on his decisions for their livelihood and survival. Yet, there was also an unmistakable satisfaction and pride in the Salt King's demeanor as he discussed his achievements and future plans, the contentment of a man who had successfully transformed vision and determination into tangible accomplishments that would endure long after his own involvement in the operations had ended. The broader implications of Abd al-Rahman's story, as Ibn Battuta reflected during the long journey from Taghaza toward the Niger River and the great commercial centers that awaited his exploration, extended beyond individual achievement to illuminate the extraordinary potential for human adaptation, innovation, and cooperation that could emerge when exceptional individuals were willing to challenge conventional assumptions about what was possible and to invest their lives in pursuing opportunities that others dismissed as too difficult or dangerous to attempt. The Salt King's success represented not just personal triumph, but also a testament to the sophisticated commercial civilization that had developed across medieval Africa, creating networks of trade and cultural exchange that connected diverse regions and peoples in relationships of mutual benefit and shared prosperity, despite the formidable geographic and environmental obstacles that separated distant communities and made communication and receipt transportation extraordinarily challenging by modern standards. The influence of Abd al-Rahman's example extended throughout the commercial networks of medieval Africa and beyond, inspiring other entrepreneurs to attempt similarly ambitious ventures while contributing to the gradual development of improved techniques, institutional innovations, and commercial practices that facilitated long-distance trade and economic development across the continent and its connections to Mediterranean and Middle Eastern markets. His story became part of the oral tradition of trans-Saharan merchants, passed down through generations of traders who drew inspiration from his example while learning practical lessons about the requirements for success in challenging commercial environments where survival itself was never guaranteed and where prosperity required exceptional competence, determination, and the ability to work effectively with others, despite cultural and linguistic differences that might create barriers to cooperation in other circumstances. As Ibn Battuta prepared to leave Taghaza and continue his journey toward the unknown challenges and opportunities that awaited him in the great kingdoms of West Africa, he carried with him not only detailed observations of salt production techniques and commercial practices, but also profound respect for the human qualities that had enabled Abd al-Rahman ibn Suleiman to transform a remote desert outpost into the center of one of medieval Africa's most successful commercial enterprises. The Salt King's combination of practical competence, strategic vision, and ethical commitment provided a model of entrepreneurial excellence that transcended the specific circumstances of desert salt production to offer insights into the fundamental requirements for building sustainable commercial success in any challenging environment where conventional approaches were inadequate and where innovation, cooperation, and perseverance were essential for achieving ambitious goals despite formidable obstacles and uncertain outcomes. Perhaps the most remarkable of these archaeological discoveries was the identification of what appeared to be the remains of substantial cities buried beneath the sand dunes of remote desert regions. Their existence revealed through aerial photography, satellite imagery, and ground-penetrating radar that detected regular patterns of buried structures covering areas equivalent to major urban centers of the ancient Mediterranean world. The few sites that have been partially excavated have yielded evidence of sophisticated urban planning, advanced construction techniques, and complex social organization that challenges conventional assumptions about the development of civilization in Africa and suggests that the Sahara supported urban societies comparable to those of ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Indus Valley during periods when favorable climate conditions made such development possible. The artifacts recovered from these buried cities include examples of metalwork, pottery, textile production, and artistic achievement that demonstrate high levels of technical skill and aesthetic sophistication, while architectural remains suggest familiarity with advanced engineering principles and construction techniques that enabled these ancient peoples to build substantial, permanent structures capable of supporting large populations and organized urban communities. Modern archaeological techniques, including satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and other remote sensing technologies, continue to reveal new evidence of Saharan archaeological sites and buried structures, suggesting that the full extent of ancient Saharan civilization remains unknown and that future discoveries may provide additional insights into the achievements and fate of these vanished societies. The development of improved excavation and preservation techniques also offers hope that future archaeological investigations may recover additional evidence of Saharan cultural achievements, including possible written records, artistic works, and technological innovations that could revolutionize the understanding of ancient African civilizations and their contributions to human development. The growing international recognition of the importance of African archaeological sites and the increasing involvement of African archaeologists and institutions in Saharan research provide additional reasons for optimism about future discoveries and improved preservation of sites that remain vulnerable to damage from natural erosion, climate change, and human activities including tourism, mining, and urban development that threaten to destroy archaeological evidence before it can be properly studied and preserved. The implications of Saharan archaeological discoveries extend far beyond academic interests to challenge contemporary assumptions about environmental stability, cultural resilience, and the relationship between human societies and natural systems that support them, providing sobering reminders that even sophisticated and apparently successful civilizations can be vulnerable to environmental changes beyond their control or ability to predict and adapt to successfully. The fate of the Saharan city builders offers important lessons for contemporary societies facing their own environmental challenges, demonstrating that technological sophistication and cultural achievement provide no guarantee of survival when fundamental ecological systems undergo dramatic changes that exceed the adaptive capacity of human communities, dependent on stable environmental conditions for their continued existence. The mystery of what happened to the populations of the buried Saharan cities continues to intrigue archaeologists and historians, with various theories suggesting migration to other regions, integration with nomadic societies better adapted to desert conditions, or simple demographic collapse as communities faced insurmountable challenges to their survival in rapidly changing environmental conditions that made their traditional ways of life impossible to maintain. Deep beneath the shifting sands of the Sahara lie secrets that challenge our understanding of ancient civilizations and reveal a world vastly different from the arid wasteland that confronts modern travelers. A world where great rivers flow through verdant landscapes, where sophisticated cities flourished in regions now claimed by endless dunes, and where complex societies developed technologies and cultural achievements that disappeared so completely that their very existence remained unknown until 20th century archaeologists began to uncover evidence of civilizations that had thrived and vanished in the deep desert, millennia before the first caravans attempted to cross the sand ocean that had swallowed their magnificent achievements. The discovery of these lost civilizations began with scattered finds that seemed almost impossible to explain. Elaborate rock art depicting scenes of pastoral life in regions where no grass has grown for thousands of years. Fragments of pottery and metalwork suggesting sophisticated craft traditions in areas now devoid of permanent human habitation. And most mysteriously, the remains of substantial stone structures buried beneath sand dunes in locations so remote and desolate that their very existence challenged conventional understanding of where and how ancient peoples could have established permanent settlements in regions that modern technology struggles to make habitable, even temporarily. The rock art galleries of the Sahara, scattered across thousands of square miles of desert terrain from the Hagar mountains of Algeria to the remote plateaus of Chad and Libya, constitute one of the world's most extensive and remarkable collections of prehistoric artistic expression, preserving a visual record of vanished civilizations that spans thousands of years and chronicles the gradual transformation of a green and fertile landscape into the harsh desert environment that has defined the Sahara for the past several millennia. These ancient artists, working with pigments derived from local minerals and organic materials, created galleries of paintings and engravings that reveal intimate details of daily life, religious beliefs, and cultural practices among peoples whose very existence would have been forgotten without the preservation provided by the desert's dry climate and the protection offered by remote locations far from the reach of vandalism or urban development that has destroyed similar archaeological treasures in more accessible regions. The subjects depicted in this ancient art include not only the expected scenes of hunting and gathering that characterize prehistoric rock art found throughout the world, but also sophisticated representations of complex social ceremonies, astronomical observations, and technological achievements that suggest levels of cultural development rarely associated with the nomadic peoples who dominated Saharan history during the periods documented by written records. Among the most intriguing and mysterious aspects of Saharan rock art are the numerous depictions of large water bodies, boats, and aquatic animals in regions that have been arid for thousands of years, providing compelling evidence that the climate and geography of the Sahara were dramatically different. During the periods when these artistic works were created, the artists who painted schools of fish swimming through clear waters, hippopotamuses wallowing in river shallows, and crocodiles basking on muddy banks were clearly documenting environments they had personally observed rather than creating purely imaginative compositions. Yet, the locations where these paintings were discovered are now among the most arid and lifeless regions on Earth, where the nearest permanent water source may be hundreds of miles away and where the annual rainfall is insufficient to support even the hardiest desert vegetation. The implications of these discoveries extend far beyond mere archaeological curiosity to challenge fundamental assumptions about the stability of global climate systems and the relationship between environmental change and human civilization, suggesting that even the world's most forbidding deserts may have supported complex societies during periods when different climate patterns created entirely different ecological conditions. The astronomical knowledge demonstrated in certain Saharan rock art sites reveals levels of scientific observation and mathematical sophistication that rival achievements of better-known ancient civilizations, with accurate depictions of celestial events, seasonal cycles, and stellar configurations that required generations of careful observation and systematic record-keeping to develop and preserve. Some sites contain what appear to be prehistoric observatories, with stone alignments and artificial viewing points that enabled ancient astronomers to track the movements of sun, moon, and stars with remarkable precision, creating calendars and seasonal indicators that would have been essential for agricultural planning and religious observances in societies dependent on understanding natural cycles for their survival and prosperity. The complexity and accuracy of these astronomical observations suggest that Saharan peoples developed sophisticated intellectual traditions and educational institutions capable of preserving and transmitting specialized knowledge across generations, challenging stereotypes about the intellectual capabilities of prehistoric African societies and providing evidence of cultural achievements that compare favorably with contemporary developments in other regions of the ancient world. The gradual revelation of the Sahara's buried archaeological treasures accelerated dramatically during the 20th century has improved transportation and communication. Technologies made remote desert regions accessible to systematic scientific investigation, leading to discoveries that revolutionized understanding of African prehistory and revealed the existence of ancient civilizations whose achievements had been completely unknown to historians and archaeologists trained in European and Mediterranean traditions that often overlooked or minimized the contributions of African societies to human cultural development. The excavation of sites like Gabbero in Niger, where archaeologists discovered extensive cemeteries and settlement remains dating back over 10,000 years, provided direct evidence of complex funeral practices, sophisticated tool technologies, and permanent habitation in regions now completely unsuitable for human settlement, while discoveries at sites throughout the Sahara revealed evidence of metalworking, agriculture, and urban development that predated similar achievements in many other regions of the ancient world by centuries or millennia. The mystery surrounding the builders of Saharan megalithic sites extends beyond questions about their astronomical knowledge and construction techniques to encompass broader uncertainties about their social organization, economic systems, religious beliefs, and cultural practices that supported the development of such sophisticated monuments, while also enabling communities to thrive in challenging environmental conditions that would have required considerable knowledge, cooperation, and resource management to survive successfully for extended periods. The archaeological evidence suggests that these ancient peoples achieved levels of cultural sophistication and intellectual development that enabled them to undertake ambitious construction projects requiring specialized knowledge, organized labor, and long-term planning, while also maintaining the agricultural and pastoral activities necessary for community survival in demanding ecological conditions. The integration of practical astronomical knowledge with religious beliefs and ceremonial practices at Saharan megalithic sites reflects worldviews that connected human activities with cosmic rhythms and seasonal cycles in ways that made scientific observation and spiritual practice mutually supportive aspects of cultural life rather than competing or conflicting domains of human experience. This integration of scientific and spiritual knowledge may have contributed to the stability and persistence of ancient Saharan communities by providing both practical guidance for agricultural and pastoral activities and meaningful frameworks for understanding human relationships with natural forces and environmental changes that affect community welfare and survival prospects in challenging and sometimes unpredictable ecological conditions. The decline and abandonment of Saharan megalithic sites appears to have coincided with the broader environmental changes that transformed the region from relatively hospitable grassland and woodland environments to the harsh desert conditions that have characterized the Sahara during historical periods, suggesting that even sophisticated knowledge and impressive technological capabilities were insufficient to enable these ancient communities to adapt successfully to the scale and rapidity of ecological transformation that eliminated the natural resource base upon which their way of life depended. The fate of the megalith builders serves as a sobering reminder of human vulnerability to environmental changes beyond the control of individual communities, regardless of their cultural achievements or technological capabilities, while also demonstrating the potential for human societies to develop remarkable intellectual and artistic achievements, even in challenging environmental conditions when social organization, cultural values, and accumulated knowledge support cooperative efforts and long-term planning. Among the most enigmatic discoveries scattered across the vast emptiness of the Sahara are the megalithic stone circles and astronomical alignments that dot the desert landscape like forgotten temples, their origins shrouded in mystery and their purposes lost to time. Yet their sophisticated construction and precise mathematical relationships suggest the work of ancient peoples whose understanding of mathematics, astronomy, and engineering rivaled that of better-known civilizations whose achievements have been more thoroughly documented and preserved for modern study. These stone monuments, weathered by millennia of sandstorms and scorching sun, yet still maintaining their essential structural integrity and geometric precision, stand as silent witnesses to intellectual and cultural achievements that challenge conventional assumptions about the development of human civilization and the distribution of advanced knowledge in the ancient world, offering tantalizing glimpses of sophisticated societies that flourished in regions now considered among the most inhospitable places on Earth. The Stone Circle Complex and Nabta Playa in southern Egypt, discovered and extensively studied during the late 20th century, represents perhaps the most remarkable example of ancient Saharan astronomical knowledge and engineering capability, consisting of numerous megalithic structures arranged in patterns that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics and mathematical relationships that were not achieved by other known civilizations until much later periods in human history. The main stone circle, constructed approximately 7,000 years ago, when the region still received sufficient rainfall to support permanent settlement in seasonal lakes, contains alignments that accurately track the summer solstice and other significant astronomical events with precision that required generations of careful observation and mathematical calculation to achieve. The complexity and accuracy of these alignments suggest that the builders possessed not only advanced observational skills, but also theoretical understanding of celestial mechanics that enabled them to predict astronomical events and create permanent markers for seasonal celebrations and agricultural planning that would have been essential for successful community life in environments where understanding natural cycles meant the difference between prosperity and starvation. The megalithic structures at Nabta Playa extend far beyond simple stone circles to include what archaeologists have identified as possible prehistoric calendar systems, stellar observatories, and ceremonial complexes that suggest the existence of organized religious and intellectual institutions capable of preserving and transmitting specialized knowledge across generations of builders and users who maintained these sophisticated facilities for centuries, or possibly millennia before environmental changes forced their abandonment and gradual burial beneath advancing desert sands. The underground chambers discovered beneath some of the stone circles contain carved sculptures and arranged artifacts that appear to represent cosmic symbolism and religious beliefs related to stellar observations and seasonal cycles, indicating that astronomical knowledge was integrated with spiritual traditions and community identity in ways that made scientific observation and religious practice mutually reinforcing aspects of cultural life rather than separate domains of human activity as they often are in contemporary societies. The construction techniques employed at Nabta Playa and similar sites throughout the Sahara demonstrate engineering capabilities that required not only theoretical knowledge, but also practical skills in quarrying, transportation, and precise placement of massive stone blocks weighing several tons each, achievements that would have required organized labor forces, specialized tools, and sophisticated planning and coordination abilities that indicate complex social organization and institutional development among ancient Saharan peoples. The precision with which these megaliths were positioned, often requiring accurate placement within inches or even fractions of inches to achieve the astronomical alignments that appear to have been their primary purpose, suggests the existence of measurement systems, surveying techniques, and construction management capabilities that rival those of contemporary civilizations, whose engineering achievements are better known and more widely recognized by modern scholars and the general public. The astronomical knowledge preserved in Saharan megalithic sites extends beyond basic observations of solar and lunar cycles to include sophisticated tracking of stellar movements, precession effects, and other celestial phenomena that require advanced mathematical understanding and generations of systematic observation to detect and accurately record for practical use in calendar systems and seasonal planning. Some sites contain alignments that appear to track the rising and setting positions of specific stars and stellar groups over periods of centuries, suggesting that ancient Saharan astronomers understood and compensated for the gradual changes in stellar positions caused by precession of the equinoxes, a phenomenon that was not accurately described by Greek astronomers until much later periods, and that demonstrates levels of mathematical sophistication rarely attributed to prehistoric African societies by scholars trained in European academic traditions that often underestimated the intellectual achievements of ancient African civilizations. The religious and ceremonial aspects of Saharan megalithic sites reveal spiritual traditions that integrated astronomical knowledge with complex beliefs about cosmic order, seasonal renewal, and the relationship between human communities and natural forces that governed agricultural cycles, weather patterns, and other environmental factors essential for survival and prosperity in challenging ecological conditions. The ceremonial chambers and ritual spaces associated with many astronomical sites suggest that religious observances were timed to coincide with significant celestial events, creating calendrical systems that served both practical and spiritual functions while reinforcing community, identity, and cultural continuity through shared participation in seasonal celebrations and religious activities that connected individual lives to larger cosmic rhythms and cultural traditions passed down through generations of community members. The continued erosion and deterioration of Saharan megalithic sites due to natural weathering processes, climate change, and occasional human interference poses ongoing threats to these irreplaceable archaeological treasures, while the remote locations and harsh environmental conditions that have protected them from deliberate destruction also make conservation and preservation efforts extremely challenging and expensive to undertake effectively. The limited resources available for archaeological research and site preservation in many Saharan regions mean that important sites may be lost to natural erosion or human activities before they can be properly studied and documented, representing permanent losses of irreplaceable evidence about ancient African achievements and contributions to human cultural development. The gradual revelation of ancient Saharan material culture through decades of archaeological investigation has unveiled a treasure trove of technological innovations and cultural practices that paint a vivid picture of sophisticated societies whose mastery of metallurgy, ceramics, textile production, and other crafts rivaled contemporary achievements in better-known ancient civilizations, yet developed in unique ways that reflected both the challenges and opportunities presented by African ecological conditions and resource availability that differed significantly from those found in the Mediterranean world or other regions where ancient technological development has been more thoroughly studied and documented. The copper and bronze working techniques developed by ancient Saharan peoples, for example, demonstrate sophisticated understanding of metallurgical processes that enabled them to create tools, weapons, and decorative objects of exceptional quality and durability, while also developing innovative alloy compositions and casting techniques that were specifically adapted to local mineral resources and functional requirements that differed from those encountered in other metalworking traditions developed elsewhere in the ancient world. The animal domestication practices of ancient Saharan peoples extended beyond the cattle herding depicted in rock art too, includes sophisticated management of diverse livestock species that provided not only food and materials, but also transportation, labor, and social status indicators that played important roles in community organization and Turk relationships throughout the ancient Sahara. The archaeological evidence suggests that Saharan pastoralists developed innovative breeding programs, veterinary practices, and herd management techniques that maximized the productivity and survival of domestic animals under challenging environmental conditions, while also maintaining the genetic diversity and behavioral characteristics that made these animals valuable for multiple purposes, including food production, transportation, textile fiber, and ceremonial or religious functions. The relationship between pastoral and agricultural communities appears to have been complex and mutually beneficial, with livestock providing manure for crop fertilization, transportation for trade and communication, and insurance against crop failures, while agricultural communities provided grain, manufactured goods, and market opportunities for pastoral products in exchange relationships that supported economic diversification and cultural complexity. The evidence of ancient Saharan trade networks reveals commercial relationships that extended across vast distances to connect Saharan communities with markets and cultural centers throughout Africa, the Mediterranean world, and possibly beyond, creating economic systems that supported cultural development and technological innovation, while also facilitating the exchange of ideas, techniques, and materials that enriched local traditions and contributed to the sophisticated achievements visible in archaeological sites throughout the region. The trade goods found in Saharan archaeological contexts include not only locally produced items, also materials and manufactured objects from distant regions, indicating participation in commercial networks that brought exotic raw materials, finished products, and cultural influences from across the ancient world to communities that might otherwise have been isolated by the vast distances and challenging terrain that separated them from major population centers and commercial hubs. The religious and ceremonial practices of ancient Saharan peoples, as revealed through archaeological evidence of ritual sites, burial customs, and symbolic artifacts, demonstrate complex spiritual traditions that integrated astronomical knowledge, seasonal observances, and community identity in comprehensive worldviews that provided meaning and guidance for individual and collective life, while also supporting the social cooperation and cultural continuity necessary for maintaining sophisticated material culture and technological achievements across generations of community members. The burial practices documented at ancient Saharan sites reveal beliefs about death, afterlife, and social status that influenced material, culture, production, and resource allocation, while also providing insights into family structures, social hierarchies, and cultural values that shaped daily life and community organization in ways that supported both individual well-being and collective achievements. The artistic achievements preserved in ancient Saharan archaeological sites extend beyond the well-known rock art to include sophisticated examples of sculpture, decorative metalwork, jewelry, and other forms of artistic expression that demonstrate aesthetic sensibilities and technical capabilities that created objects of remarkable beauty and symbolic significance, while also serving practical functions in daily life, ceremonial activities, and social interactions. The stylistic characteristics of ancient Saharan art reveal unique artistic traditions that developed in response to local cultural values, environmental conditions, and available materials, while also showing influences from artistic traditions in other regions that were encountered through trade, migration, or other forms of cultural contacts that brought new ideas and techniques to local communities, where they were adapted and integrated into existing artistic practices. The musical and performance traditions of ancient Saharan peoples, though necessarily reconstructed from archaeological evidence of musical instruments, performance spaces, and artistic representations of musical activities, appear to have played important roles in community life, religious observances, and cultural transmission that supported social cohesion and cultural continuity, while also providing entertainment and artistic expression that enriched daily life and contributed to the cultural sophistication that characterizes advanced Saharan archaeological sites. The musical instruments found in archaeological contexts include examples of sophisticated craftsmanship and innovative design to demonstrate technical knowledge and artistic sensibilities in their construction, while also providing insights into the musical styles and performance practices that were valued by ancient Saharan communities. The educational and knowledge transmission systems that enabled ancient Saharan peoples to develop and maintain sophisticated technological, artistic, and intellectual achievements without written records represent remarkable examples of human cultural capacity for preserving and transmitting complex information across generations through oral instruction, practical demonstration, and institutionalized learning that created educational traditions capable of supporting continued cultural development and innovation despite the challenges posed by environmental change and social disruption. The evidence suggests that specialized knowledge was preserved through apprenticeship systems, ceremonial instruction, and community-based learning that integrated practical skills with cultural values and intellectual understanding in comprehensive educational experiences that prepared individuals for productive participation in community life while also maintaining the knowledge base necessary for continued cultural achievement and adaptation to changing conditions. The social organization systems that supported ancient Saharan cultural achievements appeared to have combined elements of kinship-based organization with more complex institutional structures that enabled large-scale cooperation, resource management, and decision-making processes that supported ambitious construction projects, sophisticated technological development, and cultural activities that required coordination of multiple communities and specialized groups working together over extended periods of time. The archaeological evidence suggests that these social systems successfully balanced individual autonomy with collective responsibility, while also maintaining the flexibility necessary for adapting to environmental changes and external challenges that threaten community survival and cultural continuity. The decline and eventual disappearance of ancient Saharan civilizations represents one of history's most significant cultural losses, involving the destruction of accumulated knowledge, artistic achievements, and social innovations that might have continued to contribute to human development if they had been able to survive the environmental catastrophe that transformed their homeland from fertile region to harsh desert environment unsuitable for the agricultural and pastoral activities that supported their sophisticated way of life. The archaeological evidence suggests that different communities responded to environmental decline in various ways, with some attempting to adapt technologies and social organization to desert conditions, while others appear to have migrated to more favorable regions where they may have integrated with local populations or established new communities that preserved elements of their cultural traditions in modified forms adapted to different environmental and social conditions. The legacy of ancient Saharan achievements extends beyond their immediate historical significance to provide valuable insights into human cultural capacity, environmental adaptation, and the relationship between technological development and environmental conditions that remain relevant for contemporary societies facing their own environmental challenges and cultural transitions. The sophisticated knowledge and innovative techniques developed by ancient Saharan peoples demonstrate that favorable environmental conditions can support remarkable cultural achievements even in regions that later become unsuitable for permanent settlement, while their eventual decline illustrates the vulnerability of human societies to environmental changes that exceed their adaptive capacity, regardless of their cultural sophistication and technological capabilities. The ongoing archaeological investigation of Saharan sites continues to reveal new evidence of ancient achievements while also raising additional questions about the extent and nature of cultural development that occurred in prehistoric Africa, suggesting that future discoveries may significantly expand understanding of human cultural history and the contributions of African civilizations to global cultural development. The preservation and continued study of Saharan archaeological sites represents not only an opportunity to recover lost knowledge and appreciate ancient achievements, but also a responsibility to protect irreplaceable evidence of human cultural capacity and environmental adaptation that may provide valuable guidance for addressing contemporary challenges related to cultural sustainability and environmental change. The mystery and wonder surrounding ancient Saharan civilizations continue to inspire archaeological research and cultural imagination, while also serving as reminders of the remarkable diversity of human cultural achievement and the tragic consequences of environmental change that can destroy even sophisticated and successful societies when ecological conditions exceed their capacity for successful adaptation. The silent testimony of buried cities, abandoned megalithic sites, and scattered artifacts across the modern Sahara speaks to both the heights of human cultural achievement and the fragility of civilizations dependent on environmental stability for their continued existence, offering lessons that remain relevant for contemporary societies navigating their own relationships with changing environmental conditions and cultural sustainability challenges. The social hierarchies that emerged within the great trading empires of medieval Saharan commerce created stark contrasts between the opulent lifestyle of merchant princes and tribal chieftains who controlled the flow of gold, salt, and slaves across the desert, and the harsh daily existence of the common people whose labor and loyalty made such wealth possible, yet who rarely shared in the extraordinary profits generated by trans-Saharan trade networks that connected the Mediterranean world with the rich kingdoms of West Africa through commercial relationships that concentrated unprecedented wealth in the hands of relatively few individuals, while leaving the majority of desert inhabitants to struggle for survival in one of Earth's most challenging environments. The elite class that emerged from successful participation in desert commerce lived lives of luxury that would have impressed the wealthy merchants of Cairo or Baghdad, surrounding themselves with imported goods, exotic foods, and sophisticated cultural amenities that created islands of comfort and refinement in the midst of the harsh Saharan landscape, while their less fortunate contemporaries endured conditions of deprivation and hardship that tested the limits of human endurance and resilience in their daily struggle to extract a living from the unforgiving desert environment. The merchant aristocracy that dominated trans-Saharan trade during its medieval golden age established their wealth and power through control of crucial commercial resources, strategic relationships with political authorities in key trading cities, and carefully cultivated networks of family connections and business partnerships that enabled them to coordinate large-scale commercial operations across vast distances, while minimizing the enormous risks associated with desert trading ventures that could generate spectacular profits for successful participants, but could also result in devastating losses for those who miscalculated market conditions, political developments, or the countless environmental hazards that threaten caravans crossing the world's largest and most dangerous desert. These commercial elite develop sophisticated business practices that combine traditional kinship obligations with innovative financial instruments, risk-sharing arrangements, and market intelligence systems that enable them to maintain competitive advantages over less organized or well-connected rivals, while also providing the capital accumulation and commercial expertise necessary for undertaking the large-scale trading ventures that generated the enormous profits that supported their luxurious lifestyles and enabled them to acquire the political influence and social status that distinguished them from ordinary merchants and traders. The daily life of a wealthy Saharan merchant prince during the height of trans-Saharan commerce bore little resemblance to the harsh conditions endured by ordinary desert travelers, beginning each day in luxurious tent complexes that rivaled the palaces of settled rulers in their comfort and sophistication. Furnished with carpets and textiles from across the known world, illuminated by oil lamps burning precious imported fuels, and cooled by innovative architectural features that provided relief from the desert heat while maintaining the mobility necessary for following seasonal trade routes and taking advantage of commercial opportunities in different markets throughout the year. These mobile palaces contained separate quarters for family members, guests, and servants, elaborate reception areas for conducting business and entertaining important visitors, private libraries containing valuable manuscripts and commercial records, and storage areas for personal treasures and trade goods that represented accumulated wealth and ongoing commercial investments that might be worth more than the treasuries of some European kingdoms. The cuisine enjoyed by wealthy desert merchants reflected their access to the finest products from across the trans-Saharan trading network, combining local specialties with imported delicacies that created dining experiences of remarkable variety and sophistication, despite remote desert locations where such meals were prepared and consumed. Typical feast in the tent of a successful salt or gold merchant might include dates stuffed with almonds and honey from North African oases, preserved meats and dried fruits from Mediterranean sources, exotic spices and seasonings from Indian Ocean trade networks, fine wines, and other beverages that have been transported across thousands of miles of desert at enormous expense, and locally produced specialties that showcased the culinary skills of desert peoples who had developed innovative techniques for food preservation and preparation under challenging environmental conditions. The elaborate serving vessels, eating implements, and dining customs that accompanied such meals demonstrated not only individual wealth, but also cultural sophistication and awareness of tangible standards of luxury and refinement that connected Saharan elite with their counterparts in major commercial and cultural centers throughout the medieval Islamic world. Travel and leisure activities enjoyed by wealthy Saharan merchants provided opportunities for cultural exchange, business development, and personal pleasure that were unavailable to ordinary desert inhabitants whose mobility was limited by economic constraints and survival necessities that made extended travel and leisure activities impossible luxuries, rather than normal aspects of comfortable living. The pilgrimages to Mecca, undertaken by successful Muslim merchants, combined religious obligation with opportunities for international business networking, cultural education, and status enhancement that provided both spiritual fulfillment and practical benefits for their commercial activities and social standing within Islamic society. The hunting expeditions, seasonal migrations, and visits to major urban centers that punctuated the annual cycles of wealthy merchants created opportunities for relaxation and entertainment, while also serving important functions in maintaining business relationships, gathering market intelligence, and demonstrating wealth and cultural sophistication to important audiences throughout their commercial and social networks. The health and medical care available to merchant elite represented another significant advantage over ordinary desert inhabitants, including access to skilled physicians trained in major urban centers, expensive medications and treatments imported from distant regions. The leisure time and financial resources necessary for recovery from illness and injury that might prove fatal for less fortunate individuals who lacked adequate medical care and could not afford extended periods of reduced activity while recovering from health problems. The medical knowledge and pharmaceutical resources available through international trade networks enabled wealthy merchants to maintain better health and longer life expectancy than their less affluent contemporaries, while also providing access to cosmetic and wellness treatments that enhanced personal comfort and social presentation in ways that reinforced their elevated status and cultural sophistication. The legacy and inheritance practices of merchant families created mechanisms for transferring accumulated wealth, business relationships, and social status across generations, while also adapting to changing economic conditions and political circumstances that might threaten family prosperity if traditional arrangements proved inadequate for maintaining competitive advantages in evolving commercial environments. The complex legal and financial arrangements involved in managing merchant family estates reflected sophisticated understanding of Islamic law, commercial practice, and family obligation that enabled successful families to maintain their wealth and influence across multiple generations, while also providing flexibility for adapting to new opportunities and challenges that required innovation and strategic thinking to address successfully the seasonal patterns that governed the lives of wealthy Saharan merchants reflected the rhythm of trans-Saharan trade cycles and the environmental conditions that determined optimal timing for different types of commercial activities, creating annual routines that combined periods of intensive business activity with seasons of relative leisure and cultural pursuits that provided opportunities for family life, intellectual development, and social activities that enriched personal experience while also maintaining the relationships and cultural knowledge essential for continued success in international commerce. The ability to structure their lives according to business opportunities rather than survival necessities represented one of the most significant privileges enjoyed by merchant elite, enabling them to pursue personal interests and cultural activities that were impossible luxuries for ordinary desert inhabitants whose daily activities were determined by immediate survival needs and economic constraints that left little time or energy for leisure pursuits or cultural development. While merchant princes reclined on silk cushions within their luxurious tents, sipping imported wines and conducting business worth fortunes, the vast majority of Saharan inhabitants faced each dawn with the grim certainty that survival would require every ounce of their strength, cunning, and endurance just to secure the basic necessities of life in an environment that offered no forgiveness for weakness, carelessness, or simple misfortune that could transform even the most careful and experienced desert dweller into another anonymous casualty of the harsh realities that governed existence for those born without the advantages of wealth, family connections, or the specialized knowledge that enabled a fortunate few to prosper in the unforgiving landscape of sand and stone. The common people of the Sahara lived lives defined by scarcity, uncertainty, and the constant awareness that death lurked behind every miscalculation, every moment of inattention, and every twist of fate that could separate them from the precious resources upon which their survival depended in ways that the wealthy could barely comprehend. Despite sharing the same challenging environment, the daily routine of an ordinary camel herder began hours before sunrise, with the careful inspection of animals whose health and behavior could mean the difference between life and death for families whose entire existence revolved around these remarkable creatures that provided transportation, milk, meat, hide for leather goods, and the economic foundation for participating in the trading networks that offered the only path to prosperity in regions where conventional agriculture was impossible and where natural resources were too scarce to support any other form of economic activity. These humble herders possessed intimate knowledge of animal behavior, desert navigation, weather prediction, and survival techniques that have been passed down through generations of nomadic peoples. Yet their expertise commanded little respect and minimal compensation from the wealthy. Merchants who depended on their services for the success of trading ventures that generated enormous profits while leaving the herders themselves trapped in cycles of poverty and dependence that offered few opportunities for improving their circumstances or achieving economic security for their families and descendants. The women of ordinary desert families shouldered burdens that would have broken the spirits of individuals less thoroughly adapted to hardship and sacrifice, managing household responsibilities that included food preparation and preservation under conditions that made every meal a triumph of resourcefulness and skill, textile production that transformed raw materials into essential clothing and trade goods through painstaking labor that consumed countless hours of their limited leisure time, childcare and education that prepared the next generation for the challenges they would face in an unforgiving world, and participation in economic activities that supplemented family income through craft production, small-scale trading, and various forms of labor that generated the modest resources necessary for survival in communities where luxury was measured in terms of adequate food, clean water, and basic shelter rather than the exotic comforts enjoyed by their wealthy neighbors. The children of common desert families learned the harsh lessons of survival from their earliest years, developing the physical toughness, mental resilience, and practical skills necessary for enduring conditions that would have challenged experienced adults from more comfortable environments. Yet, their education was necessarily limited to practical knowledge, essential for immediate survival rather than the broader intellectual and cultural development that might have enabled them to escape the circumstances of their birth and achieve better lives for themselves and their own future families. The games they played, the stories they heard, and the daily activities they observed all reinforced the reality that their futures will likely replicate the struggles and limitations experienced by their parents and grandparents, creating cycles of poverty and hardship that persisted across generations. Despite individual efforts to improve family circumstances through hard work, careful planning, and whatever opportunities might occasionally arise for modest advancement within the rigid social hierarchies that characterized desert communities, the housing conditions endured by ordinary desert dwellers represented one of the starkest contrasts with the luxury enjoyed by merchant elite, consisting typically of simple tents or temporary shelters constructed from whatever materials could be obtained locally or carried during seasonal migrations, providing minimal protection from extreme temperatures, sandstorms, and the various environmental hazards that made desert life dangerous even for those with adequate resources and preparation. These humble dwellings lacked the comfort features, decorative elements, and specialized equipment that made the tents of wealthy merchants comfortable and pleasant places to spend time, instead serving primarily as basic shelter that offered some protection from the elements while requiring constant maintenance and repair to remain functional under the harsh conditions that gradually destroyed even the most carefully constructed temporary structures. The food security experienced by common desert inhabitants remained constantly precarious, dependent on seasonal variations in availability, successful trading relationships with settled communities, and the health and productivity of livestock herds that provided the primary source of protein and other essential nutrients for families whose diets consisted mainly of simple staples supplemented by whatever additional foods could be obtained through trade, gathering, or occasional hunting opportunities that required considerable skill and luck to pursue successfully. The contrast with the elaborate cuisine enjoyed by wealthy merchants could hardly have been more dramatic, as ordinary families often faced periods of genuine hunger when seasonal conditions, political disruptions, or economic difficulties reduced access to even basic foodstuffs, while their affluent neighbors continued to enjoy imported delicacies and elaborate meals that demonstrated their freedom from the food insecurity that dominated the daily concerns of less fortunate desert inhabitants. The healthcare available to ordinary desert families consisted primarily of traditional remedies, folk medicine, and whatever basic medical knowledge had been accumulated through generations of dealing with common injuries and illnesses without access to professional medical care or expensive treatments that might have provided better outcomes for serious health problems that could prove fatal when adequate care was unavailable or unaffordable. The infant mortality rates, life expectancy, and overall health outcomes experienced by common desert people reflected the harsh realities of life without adequate nutrition, medical care, or the leisure time necessary for proper recovery from illness and injury, creating demographic patterns that ensured continued poverty and social disadvantage for families who could not afford the medical interventions and health maintenance practices that enabled wealthier individuals to enjoy longer, healthier, and more productive lives. The economic opportunities available to ordinary desert inhabitants were severely limited by their lack of capital, education, and social connections that might have enabled them to participate more profitably in the trading networks that generated enormous wealth for established merchant families while providing only minimal benefits for the workers, herders, and service providers whose labor made such commerce possible. The wages and working conditions offered to common people who sought employment with trading caravans reflected the abundant supply of desperate workers willing to accept dangerous and poorly compensated positions rather than face starvation or destitution in communities where alternative sources of income were virtually non-existent, creating labor markets that consistently favored employers while leaving workers vulnerable to exploitation and abuse that they had little power to resist or escape. Aging and death experiences of ordinary desert inhabitants reflected the harsh realities of life without adequate resources for maintaining health and comfort during declining years, often involving continued labor and responsibility until physical incapacity made contribution impossible, followed by dependence on family members whose own resources were already stretched to meet current survival needs and who might struggle to provide adequate care for elderly relatives whose declining productivity reduced family economic capacity while increasing care requirements that competed with other essential family activities and responsibilities. The burial customs and mourning practices observed by common people were necessarily simple affairs that honored deceased family members while acknowledging the practical realities that made elaborate funeral observances impossible, luxuries for families whose resources were required for the continued survival of living members who could not afford extended periods of reduced economic activity during mourning periods that might endanger family welfare and survival. Prospects in communities where every individual's contribution was essential for collective success. The intersection of elite wealth and common poverty in medieval Saharan society created complex patterns of interaction, dependence, and mutual adaptation that shaped the daily experiences of individuals from all social levels while establishing institutional frameworks and cultural norms that both reinforced existing inequalities and provided limited mechanisms for social mobility, cooperation, mutual benefit that enabled the entire social system to function effectively despite the enormous disparities in resources, opportunities, and life experiences that characterized relationships between merchant princes and the ordinary people whose labor, loyalty, specialized knowledge made trans-Saharan commerce possible on scales that generated unprecedented wealth for successful participants while creating new forms of economic dependence and social stratification that influenced every aspect of life in desert communities throughout North and West Africa. The elaborate social protocols that govern interactions between individuals of different social ranks reflected both the practical necessities of maintaining cooperative relationships essential for economic success and survival, and the cultural values and religious beliefs that provided moral frameworks for understanding, in justifying the social inequalities that enabled some families to accumulate enormous wealth, while others struggled with poverty and deprivation. That seemed to offer a little hope for improvement despite individual efforts to advance their circumstances through hard work, careful planning, whatever opportunities might occasionally become available for modest social advancement. The employment relationships that connected wealthy merchants with ordinary desert inhabitants created forms of economic dependence that offered both opportunities and constraints for workers whose survival, often depended on maintaining favorable relationships with employers who controlled access to wages, trade opportunities, and other economic benefits that could mean the difference between basic security and desperate poverty for families whose alternative sources of income remained limited by the harsh environmental conditions and restricted economic opportunities that characterized life in desert regions where conventional forms of economic activity were impossible, and where participation in trading networks provided the primary path to prosperity for those with sufficient resources and knowledge to engage successfully in commercial ventures. The camel handlers, guides, guards, and various service providers who worked for merchant caravans occupied ambiguous social positions that combined elements of skilled labor, personal service, and specialized expertise that made them valuable employees, while also leaving them vulnerable to exploitation and abuse by employers who possessed superior economic power and social status that enabled them to dictate working conditions and compensation levels that reflected the abundant supply of desperate workers, rather than the true value of the services they provided. The marriage and kinship relationships that occasionally connected families from different social levels created opportunities for social mobility and cultural exchange that could blur some of the boundaries between elite and common life, while also generating tensions and conflicts that reflected the practical difficulties of bridging enormous gaps in wealth, education, and cultural sophistication that characterized the differences between merchant families and ordinary desert inhabitants. The strategic marriages arranged between wealthy merchants and the daughters of skilled craftsmen, successful herders, or respected religious figures could provide economic advancement and social status for common families, while also giving merchant families access to specialized knowledge, local connections, and community legitimacy that enhanced their business operations and political influence within desert communities, where local relationships and cultural knowledge remained important for commercial success despite the international scope of trading networks. The cultural exchanges that occurred between social classes in Sahara society created dynamic interactions between elite cosmopolitan knowledge and local traditional wisdom that enriched the cultural life of desert communities, while also creating opportunities for innovation and adaptation that enabled both wealthy and common people to benefit from the combined insights and experiences of individuals whose different social positions provided access to different types of knowledge, skills, and cultural resources that could be shared through various forms of social interaction, including employment relationships, commercial partnerships, religious activities, and informal social contacts that crossed class boundaries despite the general patterns of social separation and hierarchy that characterized most aspects of community life. The political relationships between merchant, elite, and ordinary desert inhabitants involved complex negotiations over authority, loyalty, and mutual obligation that reflected the practical realities of maintaining social order and economic cooperation in environments where traditional forms of political control were often inadequate for managing the diverse populations, competing interests, and complex economic relationships that characterized communities dependent on trans-Saharan commerce for their prosperity and survival. The informal political influence exercised by wealthy merchants often required careful attention to the concerns and interests of common people whose cooperation was essential for successful trading operations, and whose potential resistance or withdrawal of support could create serious problems for commercial ventures that depended on local knowledge, labor, and political stability that could only be maintained through relationships that provided mutual benefits, despite the obvious qualities in wealth and formal political power that characterized interactions between different social groups. The educational relationships between elite and common families occasionally created opportunities for talented individuals from poor backgrounds to acquire the knowledge and skills necessary for improving their social and economic circumstances. Through various forms of patronage, apprenticeship, and informal instruction that enabled bright young people to develop capabilities that might otherwise have remained undeveloped due to their families' inability to provide formal education and cultural opportunities. The scholars, craftsmen who served wealthy merchant families often originated from common backgrounds but achieved considerable social status and economic security through their specialized knowledge and professional skills that made them valuable members of elite households, while also enabling them to serve as intermediaries and cultural bridges between different social levels. Then, desert communities. The military and security relationships that protected merchant caravans and trading operations required cooperation between wealthy employers and ordinary workers who possessed the physical skills, local knowledge, and courage necessary for defending valuable trade goods and personnel against the various forms of violence and theft that threatened commercial ventures, crossing regions where political authority was weak and where banditry and tribal conflicts created constant dangers for travelers carrying valuable cargo across remote and sparsely populated territories. The guards, scouts, and military specialists who provided security services for merchant caravans occupied important positions that commanded respect and relatively good compensation, while also involving considerable personal risk and demanding specialized knowledge of desert warfare, weapons, and tactics that enabled small groups of determined fighters to protect large, valuable caravans against potentially superior numbers of attackers who sought to profit from robbery and violence rather than legitimate commercial activity. The technological and knowledge exchanges between different social classes created opportunities for innovation and improvement that benefited entire communities, while also reflecting the different types of expertise and resources available to individuals from various backgrounds and social positions within desert society. Practical knowledge of common people regarding animal behavior, weather patterns, navigation techniques, and survival skills complemented the theoretical knowledge and commercial expertise of wealthy merchants in ways that created synergistic relationships that enhanced the effectiveness and success of trading ventures, while also providing opportunities for ordinary individuals to contribute their specialized knowledge and receive recognition and compensation for their expertise and experience. The seasonal and cyclical patterns of social interaction in desert communities created recurring opportunities for different social classes to come together for shared activities, including religious celebrations, market days, and seasonal gatherings that temporarily reduced social barriers while also reinforcing community solidarity and cultural identity that transcended individual economic circumstances and social status differences. These periodic events provided important social functions that maintained community cohesion and cultural continuity, while also creating opportunities for business relationships, marriage negotiations, and various forms of social and cultural exchange that enriched the lives of all participants regardless of their individual wealth or social position within the broader community hierarchy.